Welcome to the virtual lecture, The Power of Women's Voices, with guest speaker Jasmine Wilson, hosted by the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking. So before we get started, I'd like to invite you to share in the chat where you're joining us from. I'd also like to say that this is the second presentation in our virtual lecture series for a community of artists, African American works on paper from the Cochrane Collection. If you're interested in hearing the first talk in the series, it is now posted on our website, www.paper.gatech.edu. That's paper.gatech.edu. So if you're in the Atlanta area, I hope you'll stop in and see the show in person. West and Missy Cochrane have a fabulous collection. And it's just really a treat to be able to share with you all some of the works that are in their collection. The show is up through December 2nd. We're located on the campus of Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta on 10th Street, just off of 10th Street. And if you'd like to join a guided tour, we have a number of free tours scheduled, and those are also posted on our website. You can see our address there, paper.gatech.edu. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jasmine. Jasmine Wilson is a writer, curator, and scholar from Atlanta, Georgia. Her creative practice centers criticism, healing, and care. Jasmine is committed to using African aesthetic approaches to study artwork by and about Black women. She currently works at the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art. In recent posts, Jasmine has held positions at the High Museum of Art, Studio Museum in Harlem, and the AUC Art History and Cultural and Curatorial Studies Collective at Spelman College. Her writings have appeared in Sugarcane Magazine, Contemporary and Burnaway, among others. Jasmine received her MA in African American Studies from Clark Atlanta University, where she completed her thesis, The African Symbolism of Simone Lee's Brick House Sculpture. Jasmine holds a BA in English with Phi Beta Kappa and Summa Cum Laude honors from Howard University. I'm going to pass this over to Jasmine.
All righty. Thank you, Jerusha. Thank you so much for having me this evening. Again, my name is Jasmine Wilson, and I'm so excited to share with you all my presentation tonight. I'd also like to give a special thanks to the Robert C. Williams Museum and also to the Georgia Tech friends and colleagues and community who have assisted in making this lecture possible. I'd also like to acknowledge everyone in this speaking series who has gone before me and who will follow my presentation this evening. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone. So tonight I'll be presenting on the power of women's voices in the collection of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art and the Cochrane Collection. To provide a brief overview of my presentation, I'm going to be highlighting tonight, a brief history of Spelman College, as well as discussing with you a little bit about the origins of the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art and its mission. I'll be highlighting the museum's most recent permanent collection exhibition, Silver Linings, as well as focusing on three prominent Black women artists, Faith Ringgold, Elizabeth Catlett, and Emma Amos. Spelman College was founded in 1881 under the original name of the Atlanta Baptist Female Seminary. It was founded by two women, Sophia B. Packard and Harriet E. Giles, And on April 11th, the school opened in the basement of Friendship Baptist Church here in Atlanta. In 1924, Spelman then became the Spelman College and currently functions as a global leader in the education of women of African descent. Spelman is led by the 11th college president, Dr. Helene Gale. In 1996, the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art was founded under the leadership of Dr. Janetta Cole, with the mission to uplift art by and about women of the African diaspora. Also in 1996, Spelman opened with its first museum exhibition bearing witness contemporary works by African-American women artists. This show featured over 60 works by 25 women artists, among them Emma Amos and Faith Ringgold and Elizabeth Catlett, as well as Valerie Maynard, who I want to acknowledge today her life and work as she recently transitioned and was a part of the museum's founding exhibition. And if we could just hold a moment of silence for Valerie, I would be so grateful. Thank you. And in addition to the artists that I've named, Beverly Buchanan, among many others, were included in this exhibition, which you'll see pictured an installation shot from the opening exhibition in 1996 on the left. Although Spelman's Museum of Fine Art was founded in 1996, Spelman Seminary, and eventually upon its founding as Spelman College, was acquiring artworks from its inception. In 1899, missionary Reverend J.M. Lewis donated a collection of stuffed birds from the Americas and Africa to Spelman College. And a student, Nora Gordon, pictured on the left, class of 1888, was one of the first students who left Spelman to become a missionary to Africa. And in 1900, she also donated African art that she purchased during her time in the Congo. Fast forward to the 1930s, where artist, printmaker, painter, and educator Hale Woodruff establishes the Atlanta University Center Art Department in 1931. And during his time on campus, he was responsible for creating the well-known exhibition of paintings, sculpture, and prints by Negro artists, commonly referred to as the Atlanta University Art Annuals, which offered Black artists of all ages and various career statuses to exhibit their work, to win prizes, and to build community amongst each other over a 30-year period starting in 1942 and ending in 1970. In the 1930s, however, Hale Woodruff began working on a series of 15 lino-cut prints where he was focused on depicting the newly established buildings on the AUC campuses at Morehouse, Spelman, and Clark College. Of these prints, one of them is pictured here, depicting Giles Hall, named after Harriet E. Giles, one of the founders of Spelman. And this building still stands to this day on this campus of Spelman College. And this series of prints that Hale Woodruff did was acquired by Spelman College upon their creation and remain in the collection to this day. 30 years later, in 1960, the AUC Coordinated Art Program was developed to offer a diverse arts curriculum to AUC students, focusing in a number of media and fields, including art education, art history, ceramics, painting, sculpture, photography, among other media. And in 1967, Hans Bala served as the chair of the Spelman College Department of Art. And he created and led an artist in residence program that invited artists such as Benny Andrews, Herman Kofi Bailey, Floyd Coleman, and Sam Gilliam on campus to build their practices as working artists. And as a result, Professor Bala was able to acquire works from each of these artists and to further add to Spelman College's collection holdings. Most recently, this past spring, the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art exhibited Silver Linings, celebrating the Spelman Art Collection, which focused on the longer history of collecting at the college with selections of works from a range of artists, some of whom I've already mentioned. And this show was initially created by the former curator of collections, Ann Collins Smith, and was co-curated by Dr. Liz Andrews, executive director of the museum, and Karen Comer-Lowe, who is the current curator in residence at the museum. I include in my presentation some select photos and install shots from this show to display what the exhibition looked like, and also to tie together some of the artists who I've already mentioned. In this image here, you'll see work by Faith Ringgold on the signature wall of the museum located here, as well as works from Charles White on the right, works from Elizabeth Catlett, Ramir Bearden, also works from Benny Andrews, and finally, artworks from Henry Tanner, Hale Woodruff, Beverly Buchanan, and Emma Amos on the far left. I structured my presentation around 3 women artists this evening, and this was pretty challenging given that the works and artists who were in the Cochrane collection and also in Silver Linings, which I use as my foundation for this project, span about 6 shared women artists, among them Faith Ringgold and Emma Amos, as well as Elizabeth Catlett, and also Betty Blayton and Beverly Buchanan. Trying to think of who else I'm missing, but there is one other artist whose work is a part of both the Cochrane collection and Silver Linings. However, for my presentation tonight, I start with Faith Ringgold. Faith Ringgold was born in 1930 in Harlem and grew up in New York City. She's a painter, a mixed media sculptor, a performance artist, a writer, a teacher, a lecturer. And she earned her undergraduate and master's degrees from the City College of New York in 1955 and in 1959. She is a professor emeritus of art at UC San Diego. And throughout her career, she has earned accolades as an award-winning author of 2 children's books, and also has written a biography, We Flew Over the Bridge, in 1995. She is also the recipient of 23 honorary doctorates. One thing about each of these women is their commitment to activism and the ways in which they grapple with politics of race and gender and the experiences of Black people over the course of their various bodies of work. And at the beginning of Faith Ringgold's career, she's influenced by civil rights and Black power movements. And she launches a 20-year teaching career after leaving college, working at both public high school settings as well as college settings. She grows inspired by the children that she's working with and learning from. And over the course of her career, she incorporates children as her subjects in her children's books and paintings, and is known to have been inspired by their teachings of her and also her experience as an educator. And in 1961, She takes a tour with friends and family to Europe to learn more about European masters. And in her time there, she discovers newspapers in Italy and in France that are describing the resistance movements that are happening in the American South. And while she's away, she finds a deeper motivation to focus on her practice as an artist, in addition to her work as a teacher. And as a result, she shares with the world her first painting series, American People, which was created between 1963 and 1967. And this series is one that she is very well known for, that explores the racial tensions that Black people were experiencing during the various resistance movements that were happening during that time. And in the picture, the painting on the left, Between Friends, from her American People series, there's two subjects, one a Black woman, the other a white woman, who essentially are mirroring one another, but are divided in terms of the walls that she's situated between them. And also she's grappling with some of the similarities, but also the differences that Black and white people were experiencing as a result of discrimination, racism, and overall white supremacy during these various resistance movements. And during Faith Ringgold's mid-career, as she's becoming more well-known for her commentary and exploration of themes related to African-American life and struggle, she starts to explore story quilts and uses them to depict stories about Black people, our history, identity, and also her life growing up in Harlem. And some of her inspiration for these quilts were Tibetan tankas and Cuba designs from Central Africa. And I highlight her quilt of Marlon Riggs' Tongues United, which is acrylic on canvas with a piece fabric border. So at this point, she's painting on some of these quilts, as well as layering them in various fabrics. And the story behind this quilt is actually very special in that when Faith Ringgold met Marlon Riggs, who was a very well-known and openly gay writer, historian, painter, and mixed media sculptor, among other things, he was the first person who she met that had AIDS and was fighting against AIDS at the time, and his health was declining. And she decided that she wanted to honor him with a quilt. And this quilt was created after one of her more well-known quilts, who was Aunt Jemima. And in this quilt, she centers Audre Lorde, Harriet Tubman, James Baldwin, and his grandmother as some of the more influential figures in his life. And this quilt ultimately commemorates his experience and seeks to honor his struggles and also his fight against AIDS. Later in her career, Faith Ringgold has been awarded with and honored with various retrospectives of her work at Rutgers University, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Fine Arts Museum of Long Island, among many others. And in 1991, she published her first children's book, Tar Beach, which won over 20 awards, including a Caldecott Honor and a Coretta Scott King Award for Best Illustrated Book of 1991. And in 2011, this book was turned into an animated version featuring Natalie Cole on HBO. Faith Ringgold is represented by American Contemporary Art Gallery and has been with them since 1995. And she lives and works in Englewood, New Jersey, and coming up in October, she'll be 92. And in this picture on the left is a closer up installation shot from Silver Linings, which displays her work Groove in High, which features acrylic, beads, dye, and sequins on quilted fabric, and is also accompanied by a work by Elizabeth Catlett. The second artist that I'm excited to share with you all this evening is Elizabeth Catlett, who is a sculptor and printmaker born in Washington, D.C. Over the course of her life, she, among Faith Ringgold and Emma Amos, grappled with discrimination, not only on the basis just of her gender, but also her race. And when she was applying for colleges, she earned a scholarship to go to the Carnegie Institute of Technology. But upon them learning of her race, she was refused admission and decided to attend college at Howard University. And while at Howard in 1931, she studied African art with Lois Mailey Jones, Elaine Locke, James Porter, and a number of prominent professors, scholars who were there at Howard. She then goes on to be one of the first students to ever earn her MFA at the State University of Iowa, now the University of Iowa. And among her peers that I'm sharing with you tonight, pursues work in the academy and serves as a faculty member at Dillard University and HBCU in New Orleans, and also was a juror in the Atlanta Annuals. So at this point, her work is coinciding with that likes of Hale Woodruff, who I mentioned earlier, and she's pretty anchored in the HBCU community. And one highlight in terms of the span of her career is that she's been honored with over 50 solo exhibitions. One of her early career works is Negro Mother and Child, which won her the Chicago American Exposition Prize in 1940. And Elizabeth Catlett, although she was born in the United States, she ultimately ends up living in Mexico. And in 1946, she travels there on a fellowship and works as a teacher at a workshop in Mexico City. And much like Faith Ringgold, Elizabeth Catlett is also very grounded in her politics. And Faith Ringgold, although I don't highlight it in my slide explicitly, she was arrested for her political activism, as well as Elizabeth Catlett was arrested in 1949 during a railroad workers' strike in Mexico City. And at this point, Elizabeth Catlett is, although she's not explicit in her ideologies politically, she is affiliated with various communist and socialist artist groups. And she ultimately relinquishes her American citizenship and is declared an undesirable alien by the State Department around this time. And in 1946 through 1947, she starts working on her series, The Negro Woman, which features 15 lino cut artworks. And in this image on the left, I highlight her sculpture, Negro Mother and Child, because throughout her career, Elizabeth Catlett is not only thinking about communism and socialism and how that relates to her experiences living between the United States and initially and ultimately landing in Mexico, but she's also exploring Black womanhood and motherhood, and these themes are pervasive throughout the duration of her life and career. She too pursues work as a professor, becoming one of the first female professors of sculpture at the National Autonomous University of Mexico's School of Fine Arts in Mexico City. And as a result of her relinquishing her American citizenship, she has to obtain a special visa to attend her earlier solo shows at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 1971. Elizabeth Catlett ends up teaching until her retirement in 1976. And over the course of her career, she creates artworks that feature very well-known African-American leaders such as Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Phyllis Wheatley, and Harriet Tubman, who's a part of her Negro Woman series. Later on in her career, she is established in Mexico and is living there with her husband and artist Francisco Mora, and is awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Sculpture Center among a 50-year retrospective of her work. And in 2011, prior to her death in Mexico, her work is organized in an exhibition with other prominent sculptors and artists by the Bronx Museum of Art, specifically Wangechi Mutu, who's a Kenyan artist, as well as other artists who were included in this show that features sculptures, prints, and drawings. And the image on the left is one that is also a part of the Spelman College Museum collection, Elizabeth Catlett's Stand-In Woman, Woman Walking, which is a sculpture cast in bronze depicting a Black female figure embodying themes of strength in her stance and in the strength of her and firmness of her legs, as well as poise and grace in her head position being tilted up. And the smoothness of her figure is cast in bronze. And the last artist who I'm highlighting this evening is Emma Amos, who shares my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up, and was born in 1937. She was a painter, a printmaker, a weaver, and an educator, and was exposed to the Atlanta University Center at a young age, particularly through her family and their background and connections with W.B. Du Bois, Zora Neale Hurston, among other prominent thinkers and artists who would travel to Atlanta and spend time with her family. She grew up in a relatively wealthy home where her family was the owner of the Amos drugstore. If anyone's in here from Atlanta and is familiar, her grandfather, or one of her family members, was one of the first Black pharmacists ever licensed in the state of Georgia. And Emma Amos was very bright. She learned to draw at age 6, and she attended Booker T. Washington High School. She also took classes at Morris Brown College. And she ends up going to Antioch College in Ohio to pursue her BFA at age 17 in 1958. And while a child, she also worked with Hale Woodruff, and he taught her how to draw, and she encounters him again in 1964 when she pursues her master's in art education, where Hale Woodruff is teaching at New York University. He then invites her to join Spiral, which is a Black artist group that of course includes Woodruff and Romare Bearden and Norman Lewis, among other male artists. And throughout her career, she's known for exploring and challenging hegemonic structures related to European art, abstract expressionism, identity, and doing so through her use of color, texture, and figuration. Early on in Emma Amos's career, she's mostly working in abstraction and is deeply influenced by pop art and color-filled painting. And throughout her career, she focuses on color as a tool to critique and address white supremacy. And the image to the left, which is an untitled work, this work was included in one of the shows that Spiral, the artist group, did during the 60s. And she joined Spiral in 1964, but it was a bit challenging for her, given that Faith Ringgold had applied to join Spiral before Emma Amos did, and was denied and received a rejection letter from Romare Bearden, essentially critiquing her work and letting her know that she wasn't accepted into the group. And then Emma Amos is invited to join the group as the only female artist, but also the youngest artist. And as a result, she grapples with feelings of isolation from other women artists, and was of the impression that she was only invited because of her age and because of the fact that she was less intimidating to the other men in the group. And so this kind of sparks in her some early critiques around the arts industry and how Black women and women of color are treated. And she eventually pursues work that's dedicated to feminism and also aligns herself with other feminist and women-centered groups. And so after she leaves New York, following her invitation to be with Spiral, while she's in New York, she's working at the Dalton School, which is a private school, and she's working as an assistant for first, second, and third grade classes. And then she realizes, of course, that she needs to earn more money, given that she's only paid about $2,000 a month to do this work. And so she finds and discovers Dorothy Leibs, who's a textile designer, and offers her a job to do rug design. So while she's in New York, she's trying to make money, she's trying to find her way. She joins Spiral, and then later on in her career, she pursues work as a professor, much like Ringgold and Catlett in 1980, and works as a professor at Rutgers University for most of her life, and eventually earns tenure during her time there. And as her career evolves from abstract expressionism, she starts thinking about her own experience as a Black woman and also a woman of Indigenous American descent and European descent, and begins to position herself as her own muse, and to critique the binaries and also the kind of categorical structures of race and gender. She incorporates multiple variations of skin color to further complicate the experience that she's having as a woman of various cultural backgrounds, and to convey to her viewers the complexities of her experience as she's going through them on a day-to-day basis, essentially saying to the art world that race and gender and colorism are not as neat categories as they're made to be. And in this work, you'll see two figures. One is a woman seated on this, just seated on a board, where her legs are white, whereas her arms and face are different colors and shades of brown. And then the woman opposite her is painted in a darker shade of brown here, as well as a lighter shade and among other shades of brown, to address that experience that she's thinking about as a woman of color. And as I mentioned earlier, her fascination with color itself is displayed here, where you see all these vibrant and powerful usage of various colors in her paintings. And in the 1970s, she transitions into doing illustrations for Sesame Street magazine following the birth of her daughter, India. And she does this work, and eventually in the early 1980s, she begins incorporating hand-woven fabrics into her canvases. And she does this to essentially challenge the binary and more so the hierarchical structure of high and low art, and to critique this notion that there's such a thing. And in 1982, she starts aligning herself with more feminist groups and becomes a contributor to Heresies, which is a feminist publication on art and politics. Later on in her career, in 1985, she joins Guerrilla Girls, which is an anonymous feminist artist group. And at the same time, she starts her water series, which focuses on divers and swimmers and depicting the experiences of essentially Black people immersed in water. And she does this to confront her fears of water due to her own inability to swim. And later on in the 1990s, she introduces the symbol of the X, which for her represents the absence of Black artists from Western art. And in this very well-known work by Amos titled Tightrope, you'll see the X's dispersed throughout the painting in the upper corner and center, far left in the middle of the work. And Emma Amos is walking a tightrope, which in her discussion of this work falls under her own struggles with the idea of having to be a superwoman. At the time, she's a mother, she's an artist, she's a professor, she's working towards building an artistic practice and also garnering the respect that she feels she deserves given the rigor of her practice and also her abilities as an artist. And she's adorns herself in this superwoman outfit to announce that struggle of feeling like she has to be superwoman to do all of these things and to garner the success that she feels she deserves. And so this work, among many others, also includes the African border and fabric that she also adds to her work to challenge that hierarchical notion of high art versus low art and inclusion versus exclusion of Black artists. And during the 90s, she also establishes a bond with Elizabeth Catlett and finds in her a mentor and a friend. So there's some overlap there in terms of Emma Amos being the one artist who had an encounter with Frank Ringgold through being denied from Spiral, but also finds a bond with Elizabeth Catlett as a mentor. And towards the very end of her life, she is included in select major traveling exhibitions, Soul of a Nation, and We Wanted a Revolution. And she's invited to be represented by Ryan Lee Gallery in New York, all of which are very major accolades for her, given that she was relatively ignored throughout her career and started to gain the attention of the art industry towards the end of her life. And she struggled with Alzheimer's as well towards the end of her life, and she died 2 years ago in 2020. And to conclude my presentation, I want to draw some concluding points around the subject of this presentation, which is focusing on the power of these women and their work as artists, as educators, unites them all in a unique way in that they were very clear about their political orientations, their beliefs and values, and their strong stances about highlighting the experiences of Black women, Black people, and people of color. To me, creates a synastry between the three of them. And to finish, I'd like to just center their words as it relates to their work. Faith Ringgold: I have always wanted to tell my story, or more to the point, my side of the story. Elizabeth Catlett: in the criticism of my artwork, I have had to deal with bias as a Black, as a woman, and for social and political reasons. These lives help me realize that I am not alone. We can feel ourselves a part of this greater international activity that creates art for our people, art that is a part of our lives, art that is a necessity for us. And Emma Amos: it's always been my contention that for me, a Black woman artist, to walk into the studio is a political act. And before I end, I'd like to acknowledge every single person who's been involved with putting this presentation on today. Thank you so much to everyone at the Robert Williams Museum of Papermaking and the Georgia Institute of Technology. Thank you to Wes and Missy Cochran of the Cochran Collection. And also thank you to Spelman College, the Museum of Fine Art, and all of my colleagues who have supported me in this journey and in the execution of this project and lecture today. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who joined and listened.
Thank you, Jasmine. it's great to hear more about these uh, artists. You know, a little more depth into their careers, their career paths. Um, I want to encourage you all to drop questions in our Q&A. It makes it a little easier for us to see. And while you're letting some of that information percolate into a question, I'll get us started. Um, you mentioned Emma Amos's background. She kind of come from um, uh, influential. You know, she comes from privilege, and I was curious about if you had any information on Faith and Elizabeth Catlett, like their point of entry in terms of uh, connecting or getting their foot wet, introduced to um, the idea of being an artist. Do you know about some of their early
Yeah,
childhood?
sure. So as far as I know, Elizabeth Catlett, her father was a musician. So she grew up in DC and was kind of already immersed within a household that invited and encouraged artistic expression. As it relates to Faith Ringgold, I know her experience, like her life in Harlem alone, definitely influenced a lot of her artistic choices and played a very heavy role in not only the work that she created, but just the her perceptions of Black life, like being in a very vibrant and artistically driven community in Harlem definitely influenced a lot of the work that she did. Her book Tar Beach, being set in the landscape and kind of more of a imagined landscape of New York. So I would say her home really played a role in terms of her experiences as a child, but keeping those memories and imagining them through her children's books and quilts and works that featured children as her subjects throughout her career.
Do you know if Emma Amos ever expressed the moment when her focus shifted from abstraction to really claiming herself as muse? Like, what would have been the catalyst for that kind of aha? Do you know if she ever expressed that in an interview or anything like that? If not, you know.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about like the exact moment where she decided to shift away from expressionism, but I do know that figuration for her allowed her to center her experience as this woman of various ethnic backgrounds. As I mentioned, she described herself, and I'm paraphrasing here, as kind of as being of African descent, Indigenous, American, European, and whatever else, God knows whatever else. And so with that, I think her shift to figuration helped her to articulate with a more intention some of those deeper issues that she was always kind of thinking about in terms of her experience, like challenging the Western art canon and her exclusion from it, as well as also wanting to wanting to establish a standard for herself of being at the same level as like those European masters that she's thinking with, but also challenging. I think some of that played a role in that transition. One, allowing her to deal with identity in her work explicitly, and also kind of addressing some of those issues through her own experience and through the figural representation that I think gave her more room as opposed to abstraction.
So we do have a couple of questions in our Q&A. The first being, how many pieces are in the Spelman collection?
So I am not sure. I cannot answer that for you. Yeah, I'm not sure.
And do you have a personal let's see, yeah, any personal favorite pieces from any of the artists you mentioned?
Well, I wouldn't say that I have any personal favorites. I think that as someone who, in terms of my personal scholarship, deals with the experiences of Black women, particularly how Black women are represented. And also having written my thesis on Simone Lee's brick house sculpture, which is an embodiment of the Black female form and focusing on themes of strength and beauty and femininity. The work of Elizabeth Catlett, I think, establishes a tradition for other Black women sculptors and artists in general to walk in that is unwavering in terms of her focus on womanhood and also celebration of motherhood, and thinking and wanting to uplift Black women in those various identities that they carry through the works, like the sculpture works that I showed, and also prints where she is depicting Black women holding their children, and that being a source of joy and positivity. So I would say Elizabeth Catlett's, just in general, her focus on those experiences through this perspective of it being a positive thing, as opposed to what white supremacy has perpetuated of it being something that can be a burden, or that can be something that weighs or keeps Black women from being able to live their lives. Like, all of these women were mothers, and teachers and educators, and they all did all these wonderful things. And I think through their centering of Black female experiences, I just admire all of them for doing that.
This isn't so much a question, but maybe an observation. As you were talking about Elizabeth Catlett's work, I often think about her figures as being kind of every woman kind of figures. Whereas looking at Emma Amos, both of them are drawing from their personal experiences, but she really is centering self, and through kind of having or trying to parse through and define these the complexity of her existence. You find a broader commentary on our society, but it's just interesting that the different points at which we enter that dialogue, based on how they're presenting their images. The quote that you showed from Faith Ringgold for Marion.
Marlon Riggs.
Oh, Marlon. Was he living when she produced that? Did he actually get to see that piece?
Yes. So Faith Ringgold met him, and he came to her studio for her to work on the quilt and to paint it. And in my readings about it, which stem from trying to remember which book. I have like 3 books beside me, so I'll just put them up. I reference Bearing Witness, so the exhibition that I mentioned earlier, the first exhibition at the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, and it might be from this one. I also reference Lisa Farrington's Creating Their Own Image, where she surveys Black women artists over time and the history of African American women artists. And then I also reference Emma Amos' Color Odyssey, which is an exhibition catalog from a most recent show at the Georgia Museum of Art. But I think the Faith Ringgold, her narrative about Marlon Riggs is in Bearing Witness, where she talks about him visiting her studio and being really sick. So at that point, his health was declining. And he sat on her couch in her studio and she just worked on, I'm not sure if they were drawings or if she painted right then and there, but worked on the piece with him in her presence and made sure to highlight those various aspects of his life and people in his life that he felt were important. So in that, and going back to how the image was depicted, or the work is depicted with the 4 corners of each of those 4 influential people. So she definitely spent time getting to know him and wanting to commemorate the life of someone who she, in terms of his experience battling AIDS, had never met before, which I find to be really interesting, in that I'm sure at the time people were afraid to even sit in the same room as someone like him, but she was unafraid and took it as a moment to uplift the life of someone who was battling something really serious. And that work is actually in the collection of the Studio Museum in Harlem. So for anyone who's interested.
You mentioned that Elizabeth Catlett was a juror for the Atlanta University Art Annuals. Do you know if Faith Ringgold or Emma Amos, either one of them, had an opportunity to?
I'm not sure if they were. I'm not sure if they were involved in the arts annuals. As far as I know, Emma Amos was more of a student to Hale Woodruff. So when she was really young, she was pursuing art at a young age. She, and in the catalog, Color Odyssey, an essay by Shania Harris, who's the curator of the show at the Georgia Museum of Art, writes about her being this prodigal child. So Emma Amos was really bright and really special at a young age, and worked closely and had a close mentoring relationship with Hale Woodruff, and encountered him again in New York. But I'm not quite sure about her involvement in terms of on campus and judging any of those annuals.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a question about Elizabeth Catlett. It says, what inspired her to move from sculptures to portraits of prominent people in her mid-career?
So in terms of, I'm not sure if I can speak to the move itself. I know that throughout her career, she had already been so in her first series about Negro women, she had already been thinking about Black women, and Harriet Tubman is included in that series of works. And much like Faith Ringgold, Elizabeth Catlett was aware and witnessing a lot of the Black power and resistance movements that were happening. So they were kind of a part of a tradition. They were only about 15 years apart in age. They were a part of an experience that they were seeing in real time. And to kind of capture those figures and work, I think one of her works is Malcolm X Speaks, that I'm pretty sure that's the title of one of her prints that's pretty famous and fairly well known. I think she was always kind of interested in centering like the heroes, if you will, of these struggles and movements. And she doesn't necessarily, as far as I know, do too much in terms of her sculptural practice in depicting their lives and representing them as much as she does through her printmaking.
Thank you. I'm realizing that we're coming close to the end of our time, and there's a couple of announcements I'd like to share with you all before we go, but I just really like to thank you for such a wonderful presentation. Would you like to share what's on exhibit, currently on exhibit at Spelman?
Sure. So the exhibition that's currently on view is Lava Thomas Homecoming. And Lava Thomas works primarily in pencil on paper. And in this exhibition are 3 bodies of work that feature the women of the Montgomery bus boycott in Montgomery in 1955 and 1956. And in that series are individual portraits and renderings of the women of the bus boycott. And then in the second body of work is works that focus on women that she discovered in her family photo album. And then the last body of work, Decatur, is about her great-great-great-grandfather and his legal proceedings in trying to prove his identity following his service in the military in the Civil War and trying to earn his army pension. So of those 3 works, they're themes of photography, portraiture, history, that pervade the 3 body of works in the show.
So if you get a chance, obviously we want you guys to come over and see our exhibition, but also stop by and see the exhibit over at Spelman. Just a wonderful, wonderful, insightful talk. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. We do have a couple more events associated with a community of artists, African American Works on Paper. The next one coming up is an in-person reception and artist talk with 4 of the artists that are featured in the show, and all of these are local to Atlanta. Artists Jim Alexander, Radcliffe Bailey, Kevin Cole, and Tina Dunkley. That'll be Monday, October 3rd from 6:30 to 8:30. It's free and open to the public. So I encourage you to come out and get a chance to meet the artists and hear what what's going on in their heads, what they're working on. Wes and Missy Cochran, the collectors, will also be out for the reception and artist talk as well. So you get to hear a little bit about what inspired them putting together African American Works on Paper with the focus of not only collecting African American work, but also heavily are looking to support women artists as well. Almost half of the exhibit at the Paper Museum are women artists. And then our final lecture in the virtual lecture series will be on Tuesday, November 1st with Kimberly Diana Jacobs, and she'll be talking about African American contributions to art history through the works that are available in the Clark Atlanta University of Art Museum's collection, as well as the Cochran's collection. We also have a number of workshops coming up. The one coming up most recent will be on Saturday. There's still spaces if you're interested in coming out and making paper, getting an opportunity to learn the process of making paper. We'll be making paper with flax fibers, which makes a lovely, crisp Beautiful, beautiful paper. Um, Also, we've got a paste paper workshop in November, and Jamal Barber, who gave our talk on Black Master printmakers, will be teaching screen printing class on November 15th. And we close out our programming for the year with a virtual lecture, Heritage of Indian Papermaking, on December 1st. All of this information can be found on the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking's website, paper.gatech.edu. This particular listing will be on our upcoming workshops page. Again, we have free guided tours if you're in the area. No reservation necessary, just drop in at the times they're listed here. This also is listed on our website. And if you enjoyed this presentation, would like to support future programming, free programming, we welcome donations. So at the top of the screen there, mygeorgiatech.gatech.edu giving/papermaking-museum. But if you just want to see what's up or what we have in the collection, we post various items that are not currently on exhibit that are held in our collections on Facebook and Instagram. We're also on Twitter and Pinterest. So these are the places that you can find us. Once again, thank you for joining us for this program. Thank you to Jasmine Wilson at Spelman Museum. And thank you to the Cochrans for making their wonderful collection available to the public to see. We hope to see you at some of our events and programs. If you are interested in getting on our mailing list, you can email anna.dole@rbi.gatech.edu. She's our education curator, and that address is dropped in the chat for you. I think that's it. I hope I've covered all of the bases. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
See you.